Today we're going to cover some tips when it comes to applying for financial aid, completing the FAFSA form to help move the process along and help you receive a notification of award as soon as you possibly can as you're getting ready to go to college. My name is Gary Schindler. I'm the Dean of Student Affairs at River Land Community College and also serve as the Financial Aid Director.
Is there an ideal sequence of steps when applying for financial aid?
Well, this is one of the first tips in this presentation. I would say there is an ideal sequence. I would suggest that a family try to get the FAFSA completed as soon as possible. So the first tip would be perhaps get a good estimate of their taxes completed as soon as possible. Complete the FAFSA form. So estimate of taxes, complete the FAFSA form, and then find out if the college that the student is thinking about going to, see if they have an institutional financial aid application, get that completed. So estimate of taxes, complete the FAFSA with an estimate, and then find out if the colleges that they're thinking about attending have their own institutional form. If you use an estimate, you always can have the form revised when your taxes are finalized by a data retrieval from the IRS to that Department of Education application.
Do you have any tips about the aid process?
Okay, as far as the aid process goes, I would say 5 right away that a person should be considering when they're applying for financial aid. First of all, one tip is that the earlier the better is a good rule to go by. There are some financial aid programs, one federal grant program, student employment programs, where every college has a limited allocation. And so the students that apply first get first consideration for some of that money. That does not apply to the Pell Grant, Minnesota State Grant, even though you have to do that technically by the 30th day of the semester. But I would say you want to apply early to get as much access to funding as possible, because some of it might run out. Another tip would be every college has their own priority date for applying for aid. Many colleges, like the state universities, their priority deadline is March 1. Some private colleges, it may be February 1st. For the 2-year colleges in Minnesota, that might be June or July. But by meeting the priority deadline, that means you'll get full consideration for all the aid that's available to be awarded. So find out the priority deadline date, try to meet that. If you miss it, you still can apply for aid, you still can receive aid. But priority means if you meet that deadline, you'll be considered for all aid programs, even ones with limited money. I already mentioned previously another tip. I would use estimated tax data on the FAFSA and then just revise the form once the 1040s are processed by the IRS. That's another tip. Another one would be you need to find out if the college you're planning to attend has their own institutional aid application, because they may have their own, and that should be completed at the same time the FAFSA is completed so you don't have any delays. And the other tip about trying to access financial aid, besides federal and state grant money, student loans, and work study, you want to find out what's the freshman scholarship process. If I'm going to a university or a community college as a freshman, do I need to apply for scholarships? Are they automatic? What is the process? I would find that out as soon as possible and abide by that guidance, whatever the process is for a freshman scholarship. Then once the student applies or gets ready to apply, they're going to go to the FAFSA.gov website. That's where they make application, they can make corrections, they can check to see the status of their aid application. But a tip that's tied to this that's important is that a student shouldn't wait until they're accepted by a college to apply for financial aid. You do not need to be accepted by a college to at least have your aid processed by a college. You have to have a declared major and be registered. But you can put up to 10 colleges on your FAFSA application. All 10 will get your aid data, and they may be in communication with you. But if you're undecided between, let's say, 3 colleges, I would put all 3 colleges on your FAFSA, even if you're not accepted by the college, because that you'll eventually be accepted. But don't wait and apply for aid until you're accepted by the colleges that you're thinking about attending.
What tax
data is used to determine aid eligibility?
Okay, when you're applying for aid, the critical factors that determine eligibility are adjusted gross income, taxes paid for that previous tax year. So there are some folks that work as in agriculture, maybe a small business. If they are in a position to maybe modify their adjusted gross income, that might be an opportunity to maybe maximize aid eligibility. So those are the key factors when it comes to applying for aid. The other thing that's important too when you apply for aid, it is somewhat customized. So for example, if you've completed your taxes already and then you apply for financial aid, you can actually have the tax data off your 1040 automatically loaded onto the FAFSA form. The FAFSA form is supposed to take about 20 minutes to complete because of this. It's called data integration. And it just connects your IRS data to your Department of Ed FAFSA form and actually completes part of it for you. Same thing is true of assets. There's an asset protection allowance, and if a person's assets are below a certain level, they don't even need to complete the asset section on the FAFSA form. Speaking of assets, generally if a family or the college student has to report assets, they have to report cash, savings, and checking. Again, that's normally cash available at the time they're filling out the form. They have to report other investments, and that might be CDs, mutual funds, money market accounts, and if they own stock, that has to be reported. A tip here, as far as the FAFSA goes, you do not need to report the equity in your home. But if you have a second residency, a lake home or whatever, you do have to report the value of that second residency. And then if a household is involved in a family farm operation, they live on the farm, they do not need to report farm assets on a FAFSA form. Same thing is true if somebody's self-employed. If they have a small business, employ fewer than 50 to 75 people, they do not have to report the assets of that small business. And those are good tips. Another asset, or an asset that you do not have to report, are the balances in a retirement account. So for example, if I had $100,000 in a 403B plan, I do not have to report the balance in any retirement account. It is an asset that does not have to be reported. Another part of the FAFSA form that's important to take a look at are two sections called additional financial information and untaxed income. Under the additional financial information, typically that's going to be child support payments made. And again, you want to report that because that's a deduction against your adjusted gross income. Then when it comes to untaxed income, the second question, there you have to report child support received. That's an untaxed source of income, but you have to report it. It's put back into the formula, added to your adjusted gross. And here's a critical one. If a person made a tax-deferred contribution to a retirement plan, that portion of that contribution made last year has to be reported on the FAFSA. That's added back to their adjusted gross income. But remember, you do not report the balance in a retirement account, but you have to report the tax-deferred contribution that you made to a retirement plan.
How does college determine if I'm eligible for financial aid?
Okay, financial aid eligibility is pretty much determined by a simple formula. You have the cost of attendance, whatever, and that's tuition fees, books, supplies, but also living expenses, miscellaneous personal expenses. Then the FAFSA calculates what is called an EFC, which is an expected family contribution. That's the amount that the household can afford to spend on college. So again, you have the cost of attendance, let's just say it's $15,000. If the EFC is $5,000, the family is expected to spend $5,000 on college. That's subtracted from the cost. The student would be offered up to $10,000 in financial aid. So that's how that process does work.
What do I do if my income or situation has changed at the time I am doing my FAFSA?
Okay, if there's a change in income or a change in a personal situation, this is important to be aware of. Every financial aid office has what is called professional judgment. They can take a look at your personal situation and give you another opportunity to apply, potentially with estimated income versus actual. So here's an example. we are talking about applying for aid for the 15-16 academic year. If a person had income in 2014 that they're not going to have in 2015, you need to inform a financial aid office to say, hey, my income's significantly different in 2015. They would allow you to use estimated 2015 income instead of your actual 2014 income. But the same thing is true if you have unusual expenses. If you have high medical expenses, if you're caring for someone in maybe assisted living or a nursing home, but there's a lot of out-of-pocket expense coming that most people typically don't have, you need to talk to a financial aid office and say, hey, I want you to look at my situation. It might be that you had one-time income in 2014 that you're not going to have in 2015. So you need to talk to an aid office and say, hey, here's my situation. Could you consider my 2015 information versus 2014? The same thing is true if a student that's under 24, normally if you're under 24, you're considered to be a dependent college student, which means you have to report parent information on the form. There are some cases where a financial aid director can make a student under 24 independent. And so the student has to advocate for this situation to say, hey, my parents kicked me out of the home, or I have a very bad relationship with my parents, and I'm forced to live on my own. If that can be documented, any aid office can make someone under 24 independent, which means parent information does not need to be reported. And for many students, that could be a big advantage for them. So then once the FAFSA is completed and once those other things are being considered, income, assets, dependency status, normally what occurs then, as far as the process is concerned, is that a person does the FAFSA, they'll be notified that it's been processed by the U.S. Department of Education. A few days later, the college is going to have their aid application data. They will process that, and then the end of the process is the college will notify the student that they have received a financial aid award. It's called a financial aid package. And that varies from college to college. Some colleges will send a letter with additional forms to complete. They may send you an email, they may send you a postcard, they may only notify you through your e-service account at the college once you're accepted. So monitor the status of your aid, but the finish line is a financial aid award notification that will tell you how much grant money, student employment, and student loan eligibility you have, and it may include a scholarship award also for incoming college student. Okay?